What's up, YouTube? Back again with another video, and today is episode 7 of the My Book series. I know I've been slacking, but I've just haven't been playing video games. Now that I found a good squad I've been running with now, I'm getting back into grinding again. I'm actually made some seriously huge progress on the Ultra Mastery grind. We are finished with all the ARs, as well as all the battle rifles, and I'm working on the shotguns now for the Ultra Mastery. So we're about 21,000 to 20,000 kills done out of 51,000. So we're looking good. So I am going to be skipping a chapter in this series, specifically the Adolf Park chapter, which is going to be like his rise to become the EDF leader. Just for the simple fact is I do want to leave some chapters for the imagination, and so you guys can read them when the book is published, but also due to the fact that these chapters, like Adolf Park, are kind of, I wouldn't say stale, but they're definitely more calm in comparison to some other chapters. And so yeah, so we're going to be skipping chapter 7. I know last chapter's video we left off Yemen and the Battle of Yemen. And now we're going to start seeing a lot more big battles in the coming chapters. Almost every chapter, if not every other chapter, will have a big battle of some form, because that's kind of the situation on Earth at this point, right? They're just battles happening everywhere, skirmishes every day. In every place on Earth, there's some form of military conflict going on. And it's causing some serious problems for the EDF and the U.S. military. But let's get into Chapter 8. So Chapter 8 is called America Shall Be Saved. So remember, during this time, America's taken some losses. All right, the U.S., after Yemen, the U.S. was on a winning streak and then kind of stalemated, and now we're on kind of a downward spiral. Parts of the Northwest and the South are gone. So, within the 5-month period between Yemen and now, the fight for America, specifically between the South and Midwest, has been going on. It took roughly around 5 months in between then to capture from the Midwest to about Alabama. And the South of Alabama would be some of the most gruesome fighting throughout the entire war, especially in one of the recent battles, the Battle of Miami that I'm working on. I just finished working on currently. That's in chapter, I think, 31 and 32, or 30 and 31, I should say. Now, Miami was really bad. One of the most gruesome battles of the entire war. And I really go into detail in that chapter, and we'll get to that point of just how gruesome it really gets. But by this point, America was fighting to just stay in the war. A lot of factories were destroyed the initial wave. See, the Exil were smart. The Exil are very intelligent species, and so they struck the nerve centers of pretty much any force they were fighting. So hospitals, orphanages, or places where there's young children or babies, because they know that's our population, and they know they can sever our fighting spirit by striking those areas. As well as they strike factories and military bases, but they don't strike just any bases, they strike the biggest ones. Places like, Fort Indiantown Gap in the north, which is a big military National Guard institution, as well as places like the Marine Corps training facilities. And so America begins to more localize its bases. So basically, instead of having military bases, you have FOBs, or for anyone that's not military educated, forward operating bases. If you've ever seen the movie Outpost, it's kind of similar to that. They build outposts throughout all states, throughout almost every city has some form of military outpost. It usually is armed with about 200 to 250 men, 2 to 3 heavy machinery, so aka tanks or BTRs or armored SUVs or armored troop carriers of some form. Those are usually used if something happens, they are attacked, they can get the civilians out with armored vehicles. They're not the best thing ever, but that works. It gets the job done. And they also usually have 1 Apache or 2 Chinooks, or 3 Blackhawks, one of those 3 options, located there as well for immediate medical evat. So that was the South, but the Midwest was harder. And it became a lot of trench warfare with over 1,000 miles of trenches and hundreds of thousands of troops spread out along the edge of the country. You have to remember this: the Midwest is a very, very difficult terrain, and which is why it is so hard to invade the United States in today's climate, making America actually one of the most defensible countries by just geography than any other country on the planet, besides maybe the Siberian wilderness up in Russia. But the terrain in the Midwest, and not even just the Midwest, the northeastern United States, as well as the Midwest, the northwestern and the West Coast, are all very hard to range when you get into those big mountains and those valleys. Or you go in the Midwest, you have really hot, dry climate with just miles of desert, or just really shitty weather overall, especially during tornado season, which becomes a problem. So all these things are taken into account, and so one of the biggest things that happens is a lot of just dig in and last as long as you possibly can. And that works for the most part. By August the following year, America was at pretty much a standstill, and the fight seemed like it was never going to end. It seemed like it was going to be another World War I, where it was just going to continuously go on for so much longer than it needed to go. The 32nd Airborne began launching attacks on the U.S.-Canada border, trying to break the exil grip on Canadian rebels. The rebels have been fighting for a couple of years by this point. But unfortunately, the rebels have launched some nuclear weapons in Canada, causing a nuclear winter. So Canada is like the big brother who just got completely his shit beat the fuck up. Canada got hit really fucking hard. The exil believed that they could set up a defensive line in Canada. It would make the invasion of the United States a lot easier, because the exil understand the concept that the American continent, and the U.S. specifically in that continent, the North American continent, was going to be the hardest invasion that they would have to do in the entire war. And this will become a recurring thing throughout the entire story. It's just the America slightly falling, getting retaken, slightly falling, getting retaken, getting completely taken, retaken. And it's just continuously back and forth, because the U.S. civilians in the United States have way better chances of defending, and if they do lose some land, they have better chances of regaining control of that land. Unlike the exil, who have to constantly resupply their infantry and constantly resupply their air superiority. And when they do lose, they usually are forced out of that entire section of the United States. They don't just get forced out of a city; they're usually pushed so far back that they're either off the coast in their own form of water ships, basically floating hover ships, or they're completely forced onto another continent, as you see in the Battle of Miami, where they're forced all the way back to Cuba. That's a couple 100,000 miles across the Gulf of Mexico. So that's quite a far distance to be pushed back. So that's becoming a recurring thing, and you'll see that a lot throughout the story as you read. The Canadian rebels by this point have been doing a pretty good job, but they were being harassed pretty bad. Cloak bombers were becoming really common, especially since they're introduced in the next chapter. But one thing I don't mention in this chapter, but it is there, are the cloak bombers. They have been there since the early 2060s, even before that, since the early 2050s. They took about 10 years from the initial beginning of the war to get to Earth, because they were a little bit far behind when it came to just being delivered to the Milky Way galaxy. With the exil throwing everything at the Americans and the Americans holding them back, it was beginning to piss off exil high command. So the exil high command back on Earth sent a message back to their Supreme Emperor back in the Virgo galaxy that the situation was not in their favor, and so the Conquerors sent an additional 3 million exil forces from Earth, or to Earth, to not lose any more men. So they were really focused on just harassing the shit out of America, throw everything you got at it. And in the large scheme of things, that is the strategy you want to do to take out America. You would have to throw literally everything at it all at once, because that's the only way to take control of the entire, not only the entire half the country, but the entire country and its population, which becomes a really big problem for them. They can't grasp the entire continent at once. A lot of these exil forces that are here are exil forces that are from like Europe, who have been harassed by the French and the Belgian and Norwegian and all the other countries that are fighting back over there. They're being harassed there, and then they come over to the U.S. and it's just worse. Unknown to the rest of the Earth population, they began to lose. They began seeing they think they won pretty much, because the exil begin to fall back. And surprisingly, the exil don't just fall back to another country; they leave Earth entirely. And this sees a couple years, like about 2 to 3 years, of almost peace again. There's small skirmishes of like bombing runs or something. But, like, there's no major battles for, like, a 3 years. And one thing the EDF were really good at was rebuilding. So they had a whole group of individuals, around 20,000 builders, that were civilian architects who have been on the back end of, like, every battle. So these 20,000 or so individuals would go from city to city after every battle, clean up the messes left over by, like, the troops dead, the rubble, everything, and they would rebuild. And this would work. This would work great. And so within 3 years of the exil leaving Earth, France, America, Spain, Germany, and Australia would be rebuilt. And I don't mean necessarily by the whole country, but like cities in those countries. Some of those countries had been fully rebuilt. Obviously, America would take a lot longer. And then France would also take a hell of a lot longer, especially after the whole nuke in Paris. As the cities regrew and the countries regrouped and rebuilt, their population grew. Many feared the exil would be back, but the EDF kept saying that the EDF had it under control. And again, this would be another problem, because the EDF truly did believe that they had kicked the exil's ass, because they had fallen back and they retreated and left Earth. Unbeknownst to them, though, those 3 million additional forces were on their way. The U.S. and Canadian forces in the North and then the Midwest were winning. This 3-year period saw a huge win streak in the Midwest, saw a lot of the trenches being demilitarized as the American forces kept pushing forward. As well as they're on a winning streak on Mars and Saturn. So this is another thing that this story, I really wanted to touch on this story, was that interplanet travel. And because we were capturing the interplanet travel ships that the exil were using, and we could use to modify the technology, we were on Mars and that forming small bases, like small colonies. And we saw a huge victory streak over there as well, because again, these exil forces were weak. They were underarmed, undermanned, underfueled, everything. So they were on a really bad losing streak. And at the same time, we had thought we were on a winning streak. They were really just buying themselves time for the exil's main force, around 3 million, probably even more than that, to arrive. But the truth wasn't as white and black, or black and gray, as it may seem. Because this is all things that the news were saying, that the EDF were saying. But in reality, Saturn was not a good time. Mars we were doing pretty well on, but Saturn was rough. In actuality, Saturn didn't see many EDF troops land on the planet because they were being shot out of the sky before they got there. This was one of the bigger strongholds of the exil forces that were in the Milky Way galaxy. In actuality, the EDF launched 9 nuclear ballistic missiles into Saturn, nearly contaminating the planet into very long nuclear winter, causing the planet to be uninhabitable for a very, very, very long time. But the people believe this, and they believe that EDF was the saviors of Earth, and began to go back to normal lives. Things like schools and colleges became a more popular thing. And then, but this is in 3 years, so you can't almost understand where they were coming from. I mean, 3 years is quite a while, but things aren't always the way they're supposed to be. Across the galaxy was a far bigger threat, and it was lingering, waiting, and on its way. That's where this chapter ends. This is quite a shorter chapter because it's getting ready to line us up for the second coming of the xil, which is the next chapter. And the second coming of the xil will be the one that will test humanity's might the most. Especially once you start getting to the third, fourth, and fifth waves of xil. Because the xil begin throwing a lot more energy into fighting the humans than their own hostiles in their own galaxy. Because remember, in their galaxy, they're losing. So that, for as far as they're concerned, the war's over for them over there. So what's happening now is, over the next about 30 or 40 chapters, you're going to see the xil begin to really send their majority of their forces. And even, I believe, you will see eventually, maybe, hint, hint, the Emperor himself, the supreme commander of the entire xil species, come to the humans and help fight against them. So, very interesting stuff. Very interesting. I hope you guys enjoy this series, man. I hope you guys are enjoying the book. If you guys are interested in reading it, I think I have a copy up as well as my Discord. I'm hoping it's not an editorial copy. It should be just a viewing copy. But I'm hoping that copy is updating. So, like, when I make a new chapter, it's updating. If not, it'll be published soon. I'm almost about 75% done, with chapter-wise anyway. So, yeah, let me know what you guys think. If you guys want to read it, if not, that's cool. If you guys want to listen to it, that's also cool. As well as if you guys are interested in the storyline of the timeline of this book, and so you don't really want to read the paragraphs, but you want to know the storyline and what's kind of happening. There's a timeline over on Discord in the My Book series. I should note that timeline is only from, I believe, the 2030s to the 2090s, I think it is. It's not in the 2100s yet, so it doesn't have like Battle of Miami or anything in it yet, because it does take a lot of time to sit down and go through the chapters and write down different battles or different people or whatever it may be. So that does take a bit of quiet time. Honestly, I think the timeline takes more effort than the actual book, just because I have to make sure that everything is perfect, because I don't want dates to be conjumbled or confusing. So, with that being said, guys, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, man, and I will be back on track with these again soon. I'm getting ready for the beta, obviously, for MW3, so I'm sure we'll have some MW3 gameplay in the background of these videos coming up, which would be kind of cool. And yeah, man, I have a video coming out tonight or tomorrow. I'm planning on uploading a video going over everything that we know about MW3 so far. I just need to get some more gameplay for the background, but that being said, love you guys, one of a kind, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Later.